Hey, my name is Esper, and this is my full spoiler review of the Jujutsu Kaisen Movie 0. I'm a hard woman to please. And honestly, despite my overly critical nature and high standards, my viewing experience with this movie was overwhelmingly positive. And now I can actually make the qualification of is it better to read the manga or not? But beware of my manga bias, because in my opinion, knowing what I know from volume 8 and 9 really made a difference in my enjoyment of the movie. Because as much as this was Yuta's film, this was also the culmination of Geto and Gojo's story. But I'm not gonna get ahead of myself here. Let's start off with what I'm going to cover in this video because there is a lot. There is a lot I want to talk about. First off, the fights, the animation, the cameos, everything. Then Yuta and Rika, and honestly by extension Maki's relationship, the movie, the manga. And while I did really have an overwhelmingly positive experience, I'm not going to pretend like this was the perfect movie. I will talk about the things that I didn't like, and there are some. Lastly, we'll talk about the pacing and the tone of the movie, as well as Gojo and Geto's role in this. But bear with me here, since we don't have a lot of footage from the film, you're going to be seeing a lot of my face. Okay, so let's talk about the fights in the Jujutsu Kaisen movie because they were so good. The animation, I'm not a big animation person. I don't really know what goes on behind the hood of animation, but whatever they're doing over there at MAPPA, it's working. Everything was so incredibly well done. Let's just first talk about this fight. I actually have footage for this because this was in the trailer. Maki taking out those low-level curses in the beginning of the movie absolutely just was an incredible start. The deftness and this fluidity in which she took out those curses, all the while schooling Okatsu, perfection. So there are so many fights that I want to talk about. When Nanami came in and said, "Let me handle this," I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream in the theaters, but I didn't. I kept it all inside. I was literally just clutching my thigh and trying to keep it all in here because I was absolutely fangirling the hardest you could fangirl when Nanami came on screen. And then we got to see his 4 consecutive black flashes. It really says something great about Nanami's character and the fact that he is the strongest when he is protecting other people. And I need to stop this train of thought because I am going to cry and my makeup is gonna run. Yeah, that ascended me and then beat me down to a pulp simultaneously in a way that I could not explain. It broke me and built me back up as a person. I think the best way that I can sum this up is just I will never be the same after witnessing Nanami's 4 consecutive black flashes. Despite the fact that this is a deviation from the manga, I was really happy to see Panda's transformed form, because when we saw one of the cores almost get hit, us manga and anime watchers knew immediately, kind of like, oh no, that's a bad thing. And that kind of created a little bit of tension in the movie, which I really like that. And in that same fight later on, when Geto and Yuta are fighting with each other, that black flash, I don't think that was included in the manga, but correct me if I'm wrong. I was screaming and cheering for Okatsu because I saw the blue turn into the red of the black flash and I went, yes, character development. Yuta sticking up for his friends, having something he wants to live for. That's the whole point of this movie. And I felt so proud of him in that moment. And just that sheer knowledge of how hard it is to do a black flash and all of these emotions we know are welling up in Okatsu, and his care and love for his friends is what brought about this black flash. I couldn't ask for anything more. But then they delivered more. The fight between Geto and Yuta alone was so mind-blowing that it was just such a treat. Like, I couldn't even wrap my brain around it. But then we also got the animation of the Uzumaki forming. And the way that the gray figures all sort of swirled into the vortex of this technique that Geto was creating, and you can see kind of like as they struggled get out of this Uzumaki and then get sucked into it and become this one monstrous thing. All I could think of in that moment was that Akutami Gege read a lot of Junji Ito, because the body horror, the way that it was made, Uzumaki as just a name for it, it was so incredibly well done. And as a horror lover, I saw that and I was thrilled. I'm going to elaborate on this later on when I talk about all of the nods that we got in the anime world, but I was so glad that all the fights that were mentioned in passing, like Nanami Todo, were actually animated for this movie, because it gave the movie so much life. And it gave me this sort of like, I don't know, sense of belonging with all the anime people, because we all kind of collectively know these characters. These aren't new characters that are being introduced. So yeah, I can gush about the fights all day long, but I also want to talk about Yuta and Rika's relationship, as well as kind of like that underlying relationship with Maki, which was all very cute. So I think overall this side of the story was very good, but I just think it was overshadowed by Gojo and Geto, which is honestly not a bad thing. Their story is full while Yuta and Rika's story were still developing, and the underlying current of this whole thing is really just Gojo and Geto's final battle. The plot of Yuta and Rika is overlaid on top of that, and it's a good story to accompany it because there's a lot of parallels within them. I'll talk a little bit about this in my Geto Gojo portion of this video, but only for a little bit because I don't want to add 40 minutes to the runtime of this video. But I will say though, this was a very well executed parallel of mature love versus innocent love. The one thing though is I wanted to contain the negative things to this section for it, but I just wanted to briefly mention this is the plot between the two of them meeting in the hospitals as kids. Come on, I've already read The Fault in Our Stars, you know? Like, who wore it better, Akutami Gege or John Green? If they wanted to add something, it would have been better to add, like, Rika's parents are dead, and she relied on Akatsu for love and affection. Her grandmother wasn't particularly affectionate of her, and she loved Yuta so much. And I think that sort of detail would have hit a little bit harder for me, rather than just, oh, they're sick kids and they met in a hospital and now Yuta gets to have this flashback. But I realized that might be a little bit too complex for the runtime of the movie, and also to kind of communicate all of those things. Regardless of all of that, I actually had a really good time watching this sort of development, because what we see from Rika as we begin is sort of this caricature of a monster. Yuta doesn't know how to control Rika. She appears and says really freaky, creepy things, and there isn't any sort of back and forth between them. But as the movie goes on, they kind of grow to become a lot more united, and Yuta is able to summon her energy, ask her to do things for him, and it's really just such a nice development in terms of how their relationship, like their actual relationship, progresses. And I laughed a little bit about this in the theater, but it was very striking to have Rika, you know, grab and sweep up Maki and be jealous of her, because if you'll recall, the monster version of Rika died when she was 6 years old. So those kind of like really childish sort of emotions and reactions is something that really kind of reflects that and brings you back and remind you like, hey, this is a cursed spirit, but also a cursed spirit of somebody who died when they were very young and they don't have those fully formed emotions. And Yuta is contending with this all the while trying to not murder people on accident. It was just a really interesting development to watch Yuta and Rika develop into this unit. Also to kind of explore that, you know, Yuta is moving on, and while Rika may be his promised one, he also shows affection to Maki, and Maki, you know, she blushes, she has a good time, and you can tell that they both really like each other, and there is this sort of sense that Yuta is growing up. It's nice that it wasn't an outgrowing of Rika, but rather she also grew with him. There is a lot more that I want to talk about their parting and the way that it ended, but I'm going to save that later on because there are some parallels that I want to talk about. But for now, let's talk about the nods to the anime crowd. So I really enjoyed this part of the movie because I only heard about these things in passing or read about them in passing, and getting to see these things animated was so incredible. It made me feel like I was genuinely a part of a community when I was watching this in theaters, when everybody laughed at Todo saying that he doesn't have time to waste and he has to go see Takada-chan on TV. Everybody laughed because we all knew what was going on, and it made the watching experience so incredibly nice to just know that you are amongst the other weebs that love JJK. And it was really good to just have that moment of kind of reprieve where you're like, I'm watching the characters that I know and I'm getting to see them kick some motherfucking ass. It was really, really fun. Also, Nanami's Black Flash. I know I already mentioned it, but it deserves another mention. It's also really nice to be able to see a little bit more of their personalities, because we saw Ino, who is Nanami's subordinate who really looks up to him, going and fighting and being like, oh man, I really wish Nanami were here to see me kick some ass. He didn't say it like that in the movie, but that was the general sentiment, and I thought that that was really cute. It was nice seeing, you know, Shoko out into the field, and she also got to voice a little bit of her thoughts, even if it was very brief, where she was just like, Geto, what are you doing? Because I had to think about this for a second, because I was like, do you know that Shoko is part of their class? And obviously, yes, like she was part of Geto's year. So it was just the three of them. So she knows him intimately, not as intimately as Gojo does, but that's her classmate. And it was nice to get to see her there as the other part of the trio. Also, just seeing Mei Mei kick ass with her enormous battle axe and going, all right, I've met my quota, now time to go for a full bonus. Like, yes, queen, rake in that cash, kill curses. She was absolutely killing it. The sequence of her fighting was so well animated and fluid. I had such a good time watching her. It was just fun. These nods that we got in the movie theater really made it feel like it was a communal experience watching it, and I really, really appreciate them doing that. So now that I've talked about the anime, I want to talk a little bit about how the movie differed from the manga, because you know me as a voracious manga reader who has reread and, you know, honestly, like annotated my volume 0. You know that I have to do this. So I hope you enjoy this section, because I went through the volume 0 manga and kind of picked out what was different and what was improved. And I want to say first and foremost, that beginning scene with Yuta in the room with the giant rope felt so much better animated. That was a great introduction. It also really made a lot of sense that they added in that bit about Geto picking up the school ID, because it was one like 10-second scene that added so much more context to everything else. When they added the investigation scene with Gojo actually going to the place where Inumaki and Yuta had that encounter, it was really, really nice to kind of see this part of the Jujutsu world where the police are cooperating with Jujutsu High, and these are people that are kind of requesting their services. So it kind of, one, opens up the world a little bit more, and two, you kind of just get this bit of Gojo looking up at where Suguru was sitting down, and you just see him stop there, and you're like, he smells his boyfriend. Speaking of his boyfriend, that selfie scene, Geto's assistant, was really hilarious, and it hit so well. I genuinely sat there thinking that that was added in for just the movie, and then I went back and flipped through my volume 0. It's canon that that is what happened, And it made me really appreciate how funny Gege actually really is when it was animated on screen. Because in the manga, it's like this tiny little panel and it's kind of like tucked in toward the spine of it, and you can miss it so easily. But that moment on IMAX and the big screen just made me cackle. But there are certain things that don't translate as well in the movie format, like the scene of the end of the fight of Geto, Panda, and Inumaki, where if you follow me on TikTok, you've already heard me explain this, but Inumaki was on the brink of death. He sees Yuta coming into this fight and he tells him to run. And if you're not really paying such close attention, or if you're very wrapped up in the moment, which I was too, and a lot of people probably were while they were watching the movie, you wouldn't realize that in that moment, Inumaki was using plain Japanese to talk to Akatsu. And that means that he was commanding him to run. He was using the last of his cursed energy to compel and command Yuta to run, because even though it would mean Inumaki, Panda, and Maki's certain death for Yuta to just leave, Inumaki would rather use the last of his cursed energy to save him. And this was so concisely communicated in the manga with this panel because of the way that the text bubble turns from black into white, and you can see Inumaki running out of cursed energy. So that was one of those things where I was like, this isn't a huge, enormous deal, but it is a difference from the manga that made that scene, I think, less impactful, but it was still, in the grand scheme of things, so incredibly impactful. And don't get me wrong, the movie did such a great job making an impact. The fights themselves, they were drawn for volume 0. They weren't drawn in a way that made it as compelling as it was in the movie animated. The movie itself brought so much life into the actual action of these fights. And I don't want to say Gege did a bad job, because he definitely did not do a bad job, but the improvement from the manga to the animation in the movie was so enormous that it definitely made it feel like it was so much more dynamic, and it gave it so much more life. And it made it so that you can immerse yourself so much more in these fights because there were so many moving parts. I assure you that Gege's skill has tremendously improved in drawing fights, especially if you're up to date now. But those previous chapters in volume 0 did not have that same oomph. And Mappa really brought it for the movie. Genuinely, I was so happy, and I could watch those fights over and over again. And you've already heard me gush about it so many times, so I'm gonna move on. Since I already started a little bit of criticism, let's just go head first into the parts of the movie that I didn't like. And a lot of these I know already are going to be real nitpicky. So don't go in the comments and be like, Esper, these are really nitpicky, because I know. I loved a lot of the stuff in the movie, but I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention these things, because part of the movie watching experience for me is immersion. And if there are things that took me out of that immersion, I feel like it's worth noting down. At the end of the day, the movie itself was so impactful that these do come off as really nitpicky, so just bear with me. In the beginning fight with Maki and Yuta in the school, when they were ingested by that cursed spirit, she collapsed. And then in the next scene, she was gripping Yuta by the shirt and screaming at him, only for her to collapse again. And I feel like somebody else has to have noticed this like weird continuity thing, where she passed out, got back up again, and then passed out again. I thought that was kind of just a mistake in the movie. And in that same fight, right after Yuta was able to call Rika by just, you know, like taking his ring and being like, babe, save me. When Yuta was fleeing, he says, Rika is distracting the curse. And I checked in the manga, and that is word for word. However, what Rika was doing to that curse was not distracting it. Rika was piece by piece by piece by limb decimating that cursed spirit. So that little bit, I think, just made me laugh in the movie when I wasn't supposed to be laughing, and it was supposed to be like a really intense moment. And I think even just changing that one word would have just changed the tone so much more so that it didn't suffer. And Rika was just there like laying the fucking beat down on this cursed spirit, and I was just laughing because I was like, this is no contest at all whatsoever. But that is how it happened in the manga, and I think that is something that they should have taken liberties in fixing the tone of. I am ready for the YouTube comments. I am really annoyed that they changed two things of dialogue. The first thing being, in that same scene, I guess this scene is just a big offender for me, is that Gojo says in the manga, women sure are scary. And I don't know if they were in the drawing board of the movie and go like, yikes. I personally found that line really, really funny from Gojo. I don't know if they're just stripping that down because they're scared of backlash or whatever. They changed my one and only to the one and only, which is like such a weird, subtle thing. It just annoyed me that that was a thing that they changed, despite it being translated that way in the manga. There are certain things that they have stuck through and through with, like that scene with Rika, with Yuta saying distracting, where they could have just fixed it with one word. But these seem very, very, I guess, pointed. And I didn't really like that. I think that it should have been kept as my one and only. But anyway, let's move on. This is a thing that flopped for me, and it apparently flopped for the whole theater because everybody laughed when the Rika kiss scene happened. I want to know if everybody else in your theater laughed as well, because I think that that scene was a little bit mishandled. And another thing here that is very, very true to the manga, and that's the way that it happened there, but it didn't translate well on screen, because I have this feeling that it was a little bit too much like, you know, that perfectly cut screams meme when he was kissing her, it just cuts to black. I think there was a way that that could have been tastefully done to show the kiss, or to maybe ease into it and fade into black, but that straight hard cut just kind of ruined the scene. It kind of wasn't hilarious. I think that was a big moment that flopped, that it really shouldn't have. I don't know if this was just my audience, but I know I talked to a friend and it happened in his theater as well. So I am going to blame the anime community here a little bit, because everybody has this like huge boner for everything needing to be panel by panel converted from manga to screen, when the mediums aren't the same. The mediums definitely need room to breathe and room to adapt things to be better on screen. And I think that would have been a lot better if certain things had more liberties and more freedom to work into the medium of film a little bit better. Another thing which I feel really bad saying this, because I really like this character, is that Principal Yaga's voice actor was just a little too over the top for me. I didn't like it. I don't know, maybe people did. Let me know what you think in the comments. His voice actor didn't hit for me, and a lot of the voice acting in this movie was so top notch, but his, I feel like, was just, I don't know, it felt so out of place. It's I guess not how I imagined Principal Yaga. This section is getting to be a little long, but a lot of these genuinely are more film critiques rather than like story critique. This scene particularly for me did not hit. If I talk about the breakup scene, does everybody know what I'm talking about? Like, you know, that scene felt really cluttered. I see what they were going for because that's how it was drawn in the manga. But here, it's another thing of like just taking a little bit of liberties. I think what really would have worked for me in that scenario would have been for them to start off in a crowd to kind of communicate to us, the watchers of the movie, that yes, they're in a crowd, but then eventually for the scene to become less and less crowded and for those people to fade away, because the scene really is there to convey that this is just about Geto and Gojo having this talk, and watching Gojo and Geto just stand there on a white or gray backdrop to kind of just symbolize that this moment is their moment, that they are separating ways. I think that would have been so much more impactful rather than having that really cluttered scene. And then once Geto starts to walk away and we get the first person point of view from Gojo, where he is deciding whether or not to kill Geto, I think it would have been a good moment there to have people like filter back in to Gojo's vision to just be like, hey, there are other people here who can get hurt, you know? And I think that would have been a really, really impactful way to do that scene. And I do want to commend them for the use of first person perspectives that you don't see a lot in any movie, really. Yuta had it, Gojo had it in that moment. The use of first person scenes in this movie to, I think, signify a lot of the smaller manga panels where, you know, they're clearly looking at something. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed this. And it worked particularly well here in the moment when Geto was walking away, because you get to be in Gojo's shoes for a little bit. But I think the scene could have been executed just a little bit better. And it would have been less work for them to do it this way too. So I didn't like the fact that there was a sound when Gojo killed Geto. And I think that having that killing sound really detracted from the moment. I feel like it should have been quiet, it should have been painless, and it should have been peaceful. And I think the pan up to the sky really communicated that for me in the manga, and the kill sound didn't land for me, and it kind of, again, took me out of the scene. Yeah, so I am done. I'm done. Like I said in the beginning, I am a very, very critical person. So these are all of my criticisms with the movie. It made it sound like I didn't enjoy it at all. I really actually did thoroughly enjoy this movie, and do not let all of these things detract from your movie watching experience. And if you watch the movie, let me know which one of these things that you actually resonated with. Because I don't want to feel like just a grumpy old woman like shaking my fist to the sky and just being like, get off my lawn. You know, you could have done this so much better. Let's move on, because I want to talk about the pacing and the tone of this movie, which was actually done incredibly, incredibly well. And we're back to praising the movie now. So I want to say what made this movie truly, truly great was the fact that the pacing and the tone was so very well done. Gojo's entry as the humor for this movie was so well placed, and it landed very well. His presence was so uncharacteristically good, and you can really, really tell the way that the voice actor hit these lines out of the park with his delivery, because he was able to deftly switch from the super serious I will protect the children to goofy vibes like, oh haha, I didn't tell Akatsu that this is a school to learn about curses and not about curses themselves. I think that introing with that sort of humor after that really, really heavy intro was so incredibly well done, and so smart of them to do, because you don't want to start off a movie where everybody kind of just feels like shit when they start watching it. You want to ease them into it, and you want to mirror how Akatsu feels. And I think a lot of the things that they did within the movie mirrored what Akatsu felt when we were following him. The tone of the movie itself was able to reflect what the people on the screen were experiencing. They did a really good job of this. What I really liked about the tone is that they were able to shift very, very seamlessly from funny into dark, serious moments gradually. It wasn't a sort of like, boom, we're here, everything sucks now. You can see the way that the plot progresses, and Geto actually is pivotal for this, because Geto comes in and he has this charismatic cult leader vibe, which exactly what he is as a villain. And you see him interact in this weird, larger than life way. And his voice actor hit it out of the park, because the charismatic cult-like leader magnetism was so very, very well done. And it served as a good bridge for actual Gojo's humor, which is so very similar to Geto, and the dark path that we were about to transcend into in the film. And God, masterfully done. absolutely masterfully done. Everything can be hit well by a movie. Like they can have great animation, they can have great jokes, but if they don't do the tone shift right, and if they don't hit the humor at the right moments, that shit just falls flat, you know? With the things that they did here, it was so incredibly well put together. And that is why Jujutsu Kaisen Movie Zero is an excellent watching experience. Being able to do something like insert humor with Todo and Takeda in the middle of a fight and have people laugh but still feel the intensity of that moment, A+, like A++. And I don't give those out very often. Like I said, very critical person. So this is the part that I saved for last, as they say, save the best for last, because Gojo and Geto's interactions and just overall everything in the movie was so well done, and I cried. I don't have anything eloquent to say about this. I cried like a little baby in the movie theater, and I cried while I was writing the script. There's very few scripted parts of this actual video, but I had to script this part because like not this part, but like parts coming in later, because I simply would not be able to get through it on improv, because I was so emotionally bereft after watching this movie. I was beside myself. It genuinely felt like I had sobbed for the whole runtime of this movie, and I didn't. I just cried at the end scene, like maybe the last 15 minutes of this movie, and there was just such an emotional impact with the way that things ended for Gojo and Geto that really, really impacted me in a huge way. The one scene that I want to talk about is the switch that they made. This was actually a moment where they deviated away from the manga, and I think it was the complete right choice, where they took an image from volume 9 and where Geto was just sitting there in his mental breakdown, and they used that image in the flashback scene instead of him with his back turned toward the camera, or toward us, I guess. The image of Geto just sitting there amidst his mental breakdown was so powerful that switching it out for that scene, it gave that power to the scenes that followed after it, which honestly, it was just extra. Having that image literally was just like having a nuke to kill a fly. And there was just a general sense of Gojo and Geto resonating with each other. They were like when you hit two tuning forks and then you place them near each other and you just hear this resonating sound between the two of them, because the way they had their conversation at the end, where Geto says, "You sent those two to rile up Akatsu," and then Gojo says, "Well, I trusted you not to kill my students." He said, "Trust. I didn't know we had any of that left between the two of us." Those moments when these two seem like they haven't been apart for literally, I think, 12 years at this point, and they've just picked up where they were before. And the banter, even though it's kind of dark, is still the same, that these two know each other so well, and they have this connection that nobody else has because it's special, and it's very, very poignant, to the point where Gojo, who loves his students very, very much, and we see that in his interactions with the elders, where he said, "If it comes down to it, I'm taking Akatsu's side." We see how much he would do for his students, and for him to send off his students to be beat down by Geto, knowing that Geto would never ever kill them, he had to have been no less than 100% certain. Geto, despite viewing Maki as a monkey and as a failure of the Zenin clan, did not kill her. He had every single chance to kill her, and it would have been very much in line for him to kill her, as she wasn't what his sorcery vision entailed. She wasn't in control of her cursed energy. The fact that Geto didn't even kill Maki. There is so much there that I can say, but all I'm going to say is Gojo knew deep down what values Geto really still held. That takes such an immense amount of knowing somebody and trusting that person. And because of all of this, the impact of Geto saying, "I didn't know there was any of that left between us," just absolutely broke me. It broke me down. Like, okay, I'm getting emotional and I need to finish this video. Their relationship just brings me so much pain. I dragged my roommate, not actually, she willingly went, she had a good time. And the way she described Gojo and Geto's relationship, which is the most apt description I've ever heard of the two of them, is that these two people were two non-consensually, mutually broken up people. And if that isn't their relationship to a T, I don't know what is. Because this whole interaction, you can kind of sense the fact that Gojo and Geto do not want to be apart from each other. These two radiate in each other's presence. Geto is at death's door. How do you make somebody laugh at death's door? But Gojo did it. Gojo made Geto smile in a world he said that he could no longer laugh from his heart. I have a video to film. And because Geto and Gojo's job is to be out in the world, Geto couldn't just insulate himself with Gojo as his world, with Gojo being able to make him laugh from his heart. So we got this instead. I want to talk a little bit about the send-off and kind of leave it off there, because if I don't, I'll go off on a tangent, and I already have 2 videos about these two, which I'll talk about later. But I just want to talk about the send-off that Rika and Geto had, because those send-offs were parallel. There is a bittersweetness to the way that Rika was sent off and Geto was sent off. It's a parallel to those who were pure and those who were tainted by the world. We get this beautiful scene with Rika where she ascends and departs from Yuta and all is forgiven, and it's very classically beautiful. The sky had this gorgeous hue and everyone looked at this parting with awe and emotion. But then Geto died in a back alley in Jujutsu High, still plagued by his inability to smile in this world and cursed with the burdens that he accumulated as he lived on. But it really is a testament to young and innocent love versus mature and time-tested love. While the love between those two people is tainted by hurt and sadness and all of these things that the two of them could not change in the world, I could 100% guarantee that Geto would not have preferred the grand send-off that Rika had. He would have preferred to reminisce with Gojo in that alleyway, despite the fact that Geto said he can't smile in this world anymore. And Gojo, in his own very kind soul, made that possible at least one more time before setting Geto free. And that, I think, is more beautiful and more impactful than the beautiful showcase that we got for Rika. Not to say that that's not a good send-off. The intimacy between Gojo and Geto's send-off was just on another level. I'm glad I did this last, because I am actually getting very emotional right now just talking about it. I've read Volume 0 over and over again. I've read Shibuya. I've even read Culling Game over and over again. But that first scene with Gojo and Geto in Volume 0, departing ways, just, it hits different. And not in like the fun meme way, but it genuinely just does pull something with my heartstrings, and it's so difficult for me to talk about it without having all of these emotions. I'm a lot more eloquent in these 2 videos here that I have for you, where I talk about Geto and Gojo, and each of them have their own specific message about how these two grew up, how they became who they are as adults now. And I'm much more eloquent in these because I wasn't so emotionally hungover from the experience of watching genuinely one of the most impactful movies I've watched. So go see Jujutsu Kaisen if you haven't already. I don't know why you would have watched this whole video if you haven't. And if you have watched Jujutsu Kaisen, let me know what you think down below in the comments. I hope you enjoy this. Have a good rest of your day. And genuinely, I want to hear about your experience watching this movie because I do read all of my comments and I want this to be a communal experience for all of us. So yeah, I'll see you in the comments and in the next video. Bye.